Hi everyone, it's Paul Tilley and welcome back. Today we're looking at Unit 3, Measuring the Economy, Unemployment, and Inflation. This is going to be a two-part video. The first part, I'm going to look at unemployment, and the second part, I'm going to look at inflation. Both parts are covered in Chapter 4 of the textbook and Unit 3 of the course. Unit 3 has some key objectives. The first two deal with the first section, and the second two deal with the second section. So we're going to be describing what unemployment is, how it's measured, and we're going to explain the different types of unemployment and the costs of unemployment to the economy. In the next section, we're going to look at explaining what inflation is, how it's measured, and we're going to explain the two types of inflation and describe the costs of inflation to the economy. First, let's look at Part 1, unemployment. Unemployment is a measure of how many people who are looking to work but are not working. So there's a couple of important things that you need to consider there. Just because you're not working don't mean you're unemployed. You need to be actively looking for work to be unemployed. The working age population is important in determining the unemployment rate. The working age population in the country is really the total population excluding people under 15 years of age. They're considered as kids and not eligible to work. Those in 3 territories or on Aboriginal reserves, and full-time residents of mental and penal institutions, hospitals, or the armed forces. If you look at the working age population in Canada, this graphic here shows the growth in it since 2010. So 2010, there was almost 23 million people, and moving up now to where we are today, it's getting close to around 25 million people. This is a reflection of the fact that the country, first of all, the population is growing, and second of all, the population is getting older, so more people are entering the zone of which they are considered part of the working age population. Now let's take a look at unemployment. Some terminologies first that we need to look at when we think about measuring unemployment. First, we're looking at the labor force. And the labor force are members of the working age population who are either employed or unemployed. So in other words, they're either working or actively looking for work. Those employed are those who are in the labor force and hold paid employment. Unemployed people are those who are in the labor force and actively seeking employment but do not hold paid employment. And again, it's dealing with paid employment as opposed to volunteers. So you can see again the labor force in Canada, how it's grown in the last number of years from about 19 million up to around 21, and that pretty well follows the working age population. For Newfoundland and Labrador, you can look at some of the statistics related to the labor force. The labor force in Newfoundland and Labrador, the newest measure we have is 2022. There's 257.4 thousand. Those employed, 233.2 thousand. Unemployed, 24.1 thousand. And the unemployment rate in Newfoundland and Labrador in 2022 is 9.4%. And that's down from 2021. Again, the effects of COVID were wearing off, so as a result, more of the population were employed and people were back to work. If you look at the population and unemployment in Canada in 2022, there was a total population of 38,929,902, according to Statistics Canada. The working age population of that total then, the working age population, which is 15 and over, people who are not in the territories or on the Aboriginal reserves and people who are not in the armed forces or in jail, 24,877,000. The labor force then was 20.71 million. Those employed was 19.66 million. The number of people unemployed was just over 1 million people. Here's a visual representation. I have 2018 numbers here, so just keep in mind that it's 2018 numbers. But the population is divided into working age population versus not working age population. So we see it. The population was 37 million in 2018, 30 million of which was working age, about 7 million of which were not working age. Of the working age population, so many were in the labor force and so many were not in the labor force. So 19.81 were in the labor force, 10.48 were not in the labor force. Of the labor force, people actively in work or looking for work, there were 18.66 employed and 1.16 unemployed. So in terms of measuring unemployment, what do we need to do in order to measure unemployment? Well, first of all, we need to think about what exactly is something called the participation rate. And the participation rate is really the percentage of working age population who are in the labor force either employed or unemployed. So it's the total number of people in work or looking for work. So it's the labor force divided by the working age population times 100 will give you Canada's participation rate. And in November 2022, Canada's participation rate was 64.8%. You can see here with this graphic, the participation rates over time. Notice the impact of COVID on jobs right here around the first quarter of 2020. Significant impact of job losses, but the economy bounced back pretty quickly, which is a great sign. In terms of measuring unemployment rate is really the percentage of those in the labor force who do not hold paid employment. So in order to calculate that, we take the number of unemployed people and divide it by the labor force. So if you look at the numbers for November 2022, that was 5.1%. You can see the rate of unemployment has been jiggling around a bit. I have here the numbers from 2000 right up to 2022, and the general trend, though, is downward in terms of more people being employed. It's a good sign that our economy is doing well overall. There were a few humps and bumps. In 2008, we had a major crisis, financial crisis, and again in 2020, there was the COVID crisis, and you can see those impacts being shown there in the graphic. Looking from a testing your understanding point of view, if we look at the population of Tresco, 20 million people. The working age population is 15 million. The number employed is 9 million. And the number unemployed is 1 million. So what do we need to do in order to be able to calculate these three items? Well, what was the size of the labor force? Well, in order to calculate the labor force, what we need to do is look at the number of people who are employed and the number who are unemployed. That makes up the total labor force. And that is 9 million plus 1 million for a total of 10 million. The next question asks about the participation rate. Now, keep in mind that the participation rate is really a function of the labor force divided by how many people are in the working age population. So in this particular instance, we got a total labor force of 10, a working age population of 15 million. So that means we have 66.7% of the population at work or effectively looking for work. Next, we look at the unemployment rate. Keep in mind that the unemployment rate is the number of people unemployed relative to the labor force. So we know the number of people unemployed is 1 million. The labor force is 10 million. 1 divided by 10 is 10%. Let's deepen our understanding of unemployment and the different types of unemployment that's out there right now. Okay, let's take a look at the very first one. The first one is something called frictional unemployment. If you think of friction between a couple items, this is exactly what we have going on with frictional unemployment. It's people between items, between jobs. So if you graduate from school and you're actively looking and it takes you a month to find a job, you are unemployed frictionally there because you're actively looking and there's no job for you right away. But there are jobs available. That's the point. You know, if you graduate with a business diploma and there's lots of jobs out there for business diploma people, but you're looking around, you're looking for that right job, you got to get something that fits you. That's what's defined as frictional unemployment. And that's not a bad thing. People will normally go from job to job, or people will be looking for jobs. The thing is, they're actively looking. The second major type of unemployment is structural unemployment. And this is one that we see here in Newfoundland quite a bit. And in 1992, when the fishery shut down and there were no more jobs in the cod fishery, that posed a significant challenge for the people who were fishers all their life. There was no job for them anymore. That is what is known as structural unemployment. Structural unemployment means that no matter what skills you have, those skills are no longer demanded in the current marketplace. And as a result, you are not able to get a job with your current skill set. Retraining, other opportunities, moving away, those are the things that we need to put in place in order to overcome structural unemployment. Because unless you have the skills for the current job market, you are unemployable and structurally unemployed. The third element is something called cyclical unemployment. And cyclical unemployment follows the cycle of the economy. We go from periods of really good growth and the economy is doing really well to periods where the economy slows down and jobs are not as plentiful. When we run into the bottom of the cycle, people tend to get laid off because, again, the economy slows down. Because of this cyclical nature of the economy, governments work very hard, and one of the things macroeconomics try to do is to iron out these cycles. Because of cyclical unemployment, many people are thrown out of work when the economy goes on a downswing, and that is troublesome. At the peak of the business cycle, on the other end of the spectrum, when, wow, things are going great guns, there is full employment or beyond full employment when employers can't find anyone to fill the jobs for as they're available. So that's problematic on the other side. A fourth element that is often described is something called natural rate of unemployment. What we mean by that is, let's assume our economy is going at full employment. What is defined as full employment? Well, that means everybody who wants a job has one. The trick is, though, that isn't a theoretical ideal. Because people are between jobs at some point in time, or because people just don't want to work or can't find the job they want, there will always be a certain number of people who are unemployed. And that is called the natural rate of unemployment. So a full employment rate will be in the 90-odd% range as opposed to a pure 100%. Natural rate of unemployment is going to change based on several factors. How good the benefits of EI are, really good EI benefits, people are going to be more fussy over what kind of jobs they pick. If the average search time for a job goes up, it takes a long time to find a job, that's going to mean more people are between jobs as frictional unemployment will grow. Or if the labor force participation rate changes, so say, for example, a lot of people decide to stay home as opposed to work, that's going to have an impact on the natural rate of unemployment. Let's take a look at an example just to kind of put a finer point on this idea of different types of unemployment. Categorize each of the following sets of circumstances as frictional, structural, or cyclical unemployment. The first one, Sinjet, paper mill worker, is laid off because the mill's inventories are at an all-time high. Well, paper is in inventory, people are not buying it, it's a good sign that the economy is slowing down. Because of that, Sinjet has to get laid off while the paper mill sells some of its inventory. It takes some time to sell some of its inventory. This is a really good example of a typical cyclical unemployment situation where we need to get inventories down, so the mill lays people off temporarily to get those inventories down. It's because of the economic cycle. The second one, 5 weeks ago, Allison left a job she didn't like, still looking for another one. Well, this is Allison's between jobs. She's looking. By definition, this is what's called frictional unemployment. Ian, who was a fisher on the East Coast but sold his boat after years of hard work with little return, he has not been employed for almost a year. In this case, Ian is in an industry that is probably a dying industry or a changing industry. Small boat fishermen, for example, may not be the way that it's going into the future. This is a sign of a change in the format of the business that he's in, and this is a good sign or a good example of structural unemployment. There are some serious criticisms of the official rate and how we calculate the official rate of unemployment. And there's some good reasons for this. We have a bunch listed here. Some of them understate unemployment rate, some of them overstate the unemployment rate. Look at part-time workers, for example. Part-time workers who are looking for full-time work are probably not happy in their positions. They want more. They want to contribute more. They're not being fully utilized. So as a result, part-time workers result in the unemployment rate being understated because they're not fully employed, even though the records are showing they are. We also have people who are leaving the job market because they're simply discouraged. And that's really understating the actual employment rate. They could be working if they were encouraged, but they're not. And this means that we're understating unemployment. People who fake their EI claims and say, yeah, I've been really looking for a job, but I haven't been. That's really overstating the unemployment rate because these people are not even part of the labor force. They're not interested in working. They're collecting their pokey. So it's effectively overstating the unemployment rate. We also have false information from those working in the underground economy. I'm showing up as a statistic saying I'm unemployed, but I'm actually doing some work under the table here. So I'm making money and I'm working, but the stats don't show that. Unemployment costs the economy a lot because that's people not being productive, right? If those people were productive, that would help contribute to the economy and it would produce the total value, it would increase the total value of goods and services being produced in Canada, the GDP. So the difference between what actually could be produced and what is produced because of unemployment is known as the GDP gap. And it's looking at the potential if everyone was employed and subtracting the actual, the fact that people are unemployed, we can calculate how much lost opportunity was, the GDP gap. There is such an economic law called Okun's Law, and that Okun's Law puts dollars and cents on how valuable the loss is when people are unemployed. What Okun's Law says, for every 1% in cyclical unemployment, the economy is affected, or GDP is affected by 2.5%. So 1% increase in unemployment, thanks to cyclical unemployment, results in a 2.5% decrease in total GDP. And that's significant when we're thinking about the Canadian economy. So let's take a look at test your understanding. This question is looking at the impact of unemployment on the GDP. Okay? Given the natural rate of unemployment of 8% and an actual rate of 10%, so we'll accept 8, we got 10, that's 2% more unemployment than what we expect. And given the real GDP of $800 billion, calculate the potential GDP. Well, we know for every 1% shortage in unemployment, it results in a 2.5% change in GDP. So we got a 2% drop on unemployment here, a 2% gap in what is. 2% times 2.5%, that's 5%. $800 billion economy, 5% of $800 billion economy is $40 billion shortfall or lost opportunity. So if we ask what is the potential GDP here, well, it's 800 plus that lost potential of 40, $840 billion. So that's my review of the unemployment section of this unit. The next section of the unit will look at inflation.